There's a pattern in history that has determined every superpower for the last 300 years. Control of a strategic resource, not just access. Control. The power to decide who gets it and who doesn't. The ability to shut down your enemy's economies. The leverage to dictate terms to the entire world. 4 times in modern history, a nation or group of nations gained monopoly control over the resource that powered civilization, and each time they became the dominant force on Earth. In the 1800s, Britain controlled coal, the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. Every factory, every railroad, every steamship ran on coal. Britain had it, everyone else needed it. And Britain used that control to build the largest empire in history. In the 1900s, America controlled oil, the fuel of the modern world. Every car, every plane, every military ran on oil. America had it, everyone else needed it, and America became the world's sole superpower. In the 1970s, Saudi Arabia and OPEC controlled oil prices. They didn't have a monopoly on production, but they had enough to set prices, and they used it. Oil went from $3 a barrel to $40. Western economies crashed. OPEC nations got rich, and America learned what it feels like to be dependent. In 2025, China controls rare earth elements, the 17 metals that power every piece of modern technology, every phone, every computer, every electric vehicle, every missile, every fighter jet. China doesn't just mine them, they control 90% of global processing. And without rare earths, the modern world doesn't function. This is the story of how strategic resource monopolies create superpowers, how Britain used coal to dominate, how America used oil to rule, how Saudi Arabia used oil to hold the world hostage, and how China is using rare earths to control the future. The pattern is identical every time. Discovery, development, monopoly, dependency, leverage, collapse, 6 stages, 4 examples. And right now, we're at stage 5 with China. The monopoly is established, the world is dependent, and there's no way out. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what strategic resource monopoly actually means. Not just owning a resource, but controlling it. There's a difference. Strategic resources have 3 characteristics. First, they're essential. Civilization can't function without them. In the 1800s, coal was essential. No coal, no industrial revolution, no factories, no trains, no ships, no power. In the 1900s, oil was essential. No oil, no cars, no planes, no tanks, no modern economy. Today, rare earth elements are essential. No rare earths, no smartphones, no computers, no EVs, no wind turbines, no advanced weapons. Second, they're non-substitutable. You can't replace them with something else. You can't run a steam engine on wood at industrial scale. You can't run a jet on coal. You can't make a smartphone screen without rare earth elements. The technology requires this specific resource. Third, they're geographically concentrated. They're not evenly distributed. A few places have them, most places don't. And if one nation controls the places that have them, they control everyone who needs them. When a nation gains monopoly control over a strategic resource, they gain 3 types of power: economic power, military power, and political power. Economic power allows them to charge whatever they want, set prices, control supply, and extract wealth from everyone else. Military power enables them to fuel their own military while denying fuel to enemies. They can blockade, sanction, and rival militaries without firing a shot. Political power gives them the ability to force other nations to make concessions. Align with us or we cut you off. Accept our terms or your economy stops. That's leverage. And leverage is the most powerful force in geopolitics. 4 times in modern history, a nation or group gained that leverage. Let's look at how it happened and what they did with it. Britain in the 1800s had coal. Before the Industrial Revolution, the world ran on muscle power, human labor, animal labor, wind, and water for mills. That was it. Energy was limited, production was limited. Wealth was limited. Then came coal, concentrated energy. Burn it, boil water, create steam, power machines. Suddenly, one factory could do the work of 1,000 men. One train could move goods faster than 100 horses. One steamship could cross oceans regardless of wind. Coal unlocked the Industrial Revolution, and Britain had coal, lots of it. The British Isles sit on massive coal deposits. By 1800, Britain was mining 10 million tons of coal per year. By 1850, 50 million tons. By 1900, 225 million tons. Britain didn't just mine coal, they built the infrastructure to use it. Coal-powered factories, coal-powered railroads, and coal-powered steamships. Because Britain industrialized first, they had a 50-year head start on everyone else. Here's what that monopoly gave them: economic dominance. British factories produced goods cheaper than anyone else, and British railroads moved goods faster. British ships controlled global trade routes. By 1850, Britain produced more than 50% of the world's coal, iron, and textiles. They were the factory of the world. Military dominance. The British Navy switched from sail to steam. Coal-powered warships were faster, more reliable, and didn't depend on wind. By 1880, the Royal Navy had over 300 coal-powered warships, the largest, most advanced navy ever built, and it ran on British coal, political dominance. Britain didn't just control coal production, they controlled coal supply routes, coaling stations in Gibraltar, Egypt, India, Singapore, and South Africa. Any rival nation that wanted to project naval power needed coal. And Britain controlled where the coal was. That's leverage. By 1900, Britain ruled 25% of the Earth's land surface, 400 million people, the largest empire in human history. And it was built on coal. Control of one strategic resource created a century of British dominance. But monopolies don't last forever. Other nations found coal, Germany industrialized, America industrialized, and by 1914, Britain's monopoly was broken. The empire lasted another 40 years, but the foundation was cracking because the strategic resource that powered the 1800s wasn't the strategic resource of the 1900s. Coal was being replaced by oil. America in the 1900s. Oil. In 1859, Edwin Drake drilled the first commercial oil well in Pennsylvania. At first, oil was used for kerosene lamps, a replacement for whale oil, nothing strategic. Then came the internal combustion engine. Suddenly, oil wasn't just for lamps, it was fuel. Cars ran on gasoline, trucks ran on diesel, and ships converted from coal to oil. By the 1920s, oil was becoming essential, and America had it. The first major oil fields were in Pennsylvania, then Texas, then Oklahoma, then California. By 1920, America was producing 60% of the world's oil, massive reserves, cheap extraction, and a domestic market that consumed it. America didn't just produce oil, they built the entire infrastructure around it. Refineries, pipelines, gas stations, highways, suburbs. The entire American economy was designed around cheap, abundant oil. Then came World War II. Oil became the strategic resource that determined victory. Germany needed oil. They invaded the Caucasus to get it. They lost. Japan needed oil. America embargoed them. That's what triggered Pearl Harbor. Japan gambled on war because they couldn't function without oil. And they lost. The Allies won World War II in part because America had oil. We fueled our own military. We fueled the British military. We fueled the Soviet military. Meanwhile, Germany and Japan were starving for fuel. By 1945, America had proven the strategic value of oil, and we had it in abundance. Post-war, America produced nearly 50% of the world's oil. We were the Saudi Arabia of the mid-1900s. Cheap gas, massive consumption, economic boom, and our military ran on it. By 1950, the US military was the largest oil consumer on Earth. Tanks, planes, ships, all oil-powered. And we had the supply to fuel them. Here's what that monopoly gave us. Economic dominance, the American century, suburbs, highways, cars for everyone, cheap transportation, cheap goods, the consumer economy, all built on cheap oil, military dominance. The US military could project power anywhere on Earth. Carrier groups, strategic bombers, global bases, all running on oil. And we had the oil political dominance, the Bretton Woods system, the dollar as reserve currency. Why did the world accept it? Because the US had oil. The US had economic and military power, and both were built on oil. By 1970, America was the world's sole superpower, the richest nation on Earth, the strongest military, and it was built on oil dominance. But just like Britain's coal monopoly, America's oil monopoly didn't last. By the 1970s, US oil production peaked. We were consuming more than we produced, and that created vulnerability. Enter Saudi Arabia, and OPEC, the 1970s oil cartel. By 1970, US oil production peaked at about 10 million barrels per day, but US consumption was 15 million barrels per day. The gap had to be imported, mostly from the Middle East. Saudi Arabia had been discovered to have massive oil reserves in the 1930s, but production didn't ramp up until the 1950s and 60s. By 1970, Saudi Arabia was producing 4 million barrels per day. Not as much as the US, but enough to matter. And the Saudis realized something. They didn't need a monopoly on production. They just needed enough production to set prices. In 1960, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Venezuela formed OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, a cartel. The goal was to control oil prices by controlling supply, and in 1973 they used it. October 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Israel versus Egypt and Syria. The US supported Israel. OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, responded with an oil embargo. They stopped selling oil to the US and other nations that supported Israel. Oil prices quadrupled from $3 a barrel to $12. By 1979, after the Iranian Revolution, oil hit $40 a barrel. The US economy crashed. Gas lines formed. Rationing ensued. Inflation spiked. Unemployment rose. The stock market collapsed. This was the oil crisis, and it revealed a terrifying truth. America was dependent. We didn't control oil anymore. OPEC did, and they could hold us hostage. Here's what OPEC's leverage gave them. Economic power. Oil-producing nations got rich overnight. Saudi Arabia went from a desert kingdom to one of the wealthiest nations per capita on Earth. Trillions of dollars flowed into OPEC nations. Political power. The US had to negotiate. We made deals. We guaranteed Saudi security in exchange for stable oil prices. We became entangled in Middle East conflicts to protect oil supplies. We invaded Iraq twice, partly over oil. OPEC didn't have a monopoly on oil, but they had enough to set prices, and that was enough to change the world. The oil crisis taught the world a lesson. Dependency on a strategic resource is a vulnerability. If someone else controls what you need, they control you. And that lesson is more relevant now than ever. Because today, China controls the strategic resource of the 21st century, rare earth elements, and the dependency is total. China 2025 rare earth elements. Most people have never heard of rare earth elements, but you use them every day. Rare earths are 17 metallic elements on the periodic table. Names like neodymium, dysprosium, lanthanum, europium, and terbium. They have unique magnetic, luminescent, and electrochemical properties, and they're essential for modern technology. Neodymium is in the magnets that power electric motors. Every EV has kilograms of neodymium. Every wind turbine has hundreds of kilograms. Dysprosium makes those magnets work at high temperatures. Without it, the motors overheat. Europium and terbium create the red and green colors in screens. Every smartphone, laptop, and TV uses them. Lanthanum is in camera lenses and batteries. Cerium is in catalytic converters. Yttrium is in LEDs and lasers. The list goes on. Without rare earths, you cannot build smartphones, computers, EVs, wind turbines, solar panels, MRI machines, fiber optics, or advanced weapon systems. F-35 fighter jets use 920 lbs of rare earths. Virginia-class submarines use thousands of pounds. Precision-guided missiles require rare earth magnets. Modern militaries cannot function without them, and China controls them. Here's how it happened. Rare earths aren't actually rare. They're relatively abundant in the Earth's crust. The problem is they're dispersed in low concentrations, mixed with other elements. Extraction is difficult and environmentally toxic. In the 1980s and 90s, the US was the world's largest rare earth producer. Mountain Pass Mine in California supplied most of the world's rare earths. Then China entered the market. Chinese mines had lower costs, lacked environmental regulations, cheap labor, and the Chinese government subsidized production. By the 2000s, Chinese rare earths were cheaper than American rare earths. US companies couldn't compete. Mountain Pass closed in 2002. By 2010, China controlled 97% of global rare earth production. Today, China mines about 70% of rare earths and processes over 90%. Processing is the key. You can mine rare earth ore, but turning that ore into usable metals requires complex chemical processing, separating the elements, refining them, and creating the specific compounds needed for manufacturing. China built that infrastructure. Nobody else did. The US, Europe, and Japan all became dependent on Chinese rare earth processing. We shut down our domestic capacity because it was cheaper to buy from China. And now we're trapped. Here's what China's monopoly gives them: economic power. China can set prices. In 2010, China temporarily restricted rare earth exports, and prices spiked 10x overnight. The world panicked. China made the point: you need us, we don't need you. Military power. Every advanced weapon system requires rare earths. The US military is entirely dependent on the Chinese rare earth supply. If China cuts us off, we can't build F-35s, we can't build missiles, and we can't maintain our fleet. The Pentagon knows this. They've called it a strategic vulnerability, and there's no short-term solution. Political power. China can use rare earth access as leverage. Want rare earths? Align with us. Don't sanction us. Don't support Taiwan. Or we cut you off, and your economy collapses. That's the power of monopoly control, and China has it. Let's be clear about the dependency. The US imports 80% of its rare earths from China. Europe imports over 90%. Japan imports nearly 100%. There are no substitutes. You cannot make EV motors without neodymium. You cannot make smartphone screens without europium and terbium. The technology requires these specific elements. There are other deposits of rare earths. Australia, Canada, and the US have reserves, but mining takes years to develop. Processing facilities take a decade to build, and even if we started today, we'd be a decade behind. In the meantime, we're dependent, and China knows it. In 2019, during US-China trade tensions, Chinese state media openly threatened to cut off rare earth exports. The message was clear: you need us more than we need you. Back off. The US backed off. Now let's look at the pattern, because all four examples, Britain's coal, America's oil, OPEC's oil, and China's rare earths, follow the same six-stage progression. Stage 1, resource discovery. Someone discovers that a material is essential for the next phase of civilization. coal-powered industrialization, oil-powered transportation and modern warfare, and rare earths-powered digital technology and green energy. At this stage, the resource is known but not yet strategic. Stage 2, infrastructure development. One nation builds the infrastructure to extract, process, and use the resource at scale. Britain built coal mines, railroads, and steam engines. America built oil wells, refineries, and highways. China built rare earth mines and processing facilities. This stage takes decades. It requires investment, expertise, and long-term planning. And whoever builds the infrastructure first gains the advantage. Stage 3, monopoly establishment. One nation or group controls the majority of supply, not necessarily 100%, but enough to set prices and dictate terms. Britain controlled over 50% of coal in the 1800s. America controlled over 50% of oil in the 1940s and 50s. OPEC controlled over 40% of oil in the 1970s. China controls over 90% of rare earth processing today. Once the monopoly is established, dependency begins. Stage 4, global dependency. The rest of the world becomes dependent on the monopolist. Industries are built around the assumption of supply. Economies are structured around access. Militaries are designed around the resource. And there's no easy alternative. Britain's rivals needed coal to industrialize. America's rivals needed oil to build modern militaries. The world needs rare earths to build technology. At this stage, the monopolist has maximum leverage. They can extract wealth, dictate terms, and control geopolitics. Stage 5, monopoly exploitation. The monopolist uses their leverage, sometimes aggressively, sometimes subtly. Britain used coal dominance to maintain the empire. America used oil dominance to maintain global hegemony. OPEC used oil leverage to extract wealth and political concessions. China is using rare earth leverage to advance their geopolitical goals. This is where we are now. China has the monopoly. The world is dependent, and China is using that leverage. Stage 6, monopoly collapse. Eventually, the monopoly ends. Competitors develop alternatives, new resources are discovered, technology changes, or the monopolist overplays their hand and triggers a backlash. Britain's coal monopoly ended when others industrialized and oil replaced coal. America's oil monopoly ended when production peaked and OPEC formed. OPEC's leverage weakened when non-OPEC production increased and alternatives were developed. China's rare earth monopoly will eventually end, but not soon and not without consequences. We're at stage 5. China has the monopoly. The world is dependent, and China is exploiting that leverage. Let me show you the warning signs. Warning sign 1, complete supply chain dominance. China doesn't just mine rare earths. They control every step: mining, processing, refining, manufacturing of magnets and components. No other country has the full supply chain. The US mines some rare earths now. Mountain Pass reopened, but we ship the ore to China for processing. Then we buy it back as refined metals. That's not independence. That's dependency with extra steps. Warning sign 2, no short-term alternatives. Building rare earth processing facilities takes 7 to 10 years. Training the workforce takes years. Developing the expertise takes decades. Even if the US and Europe started building capacity today, we wouldn't be independent until 2035 at the earliest. And China knows this. They have a 10-year window where we can't escape dependency. Warning sign 3, growing demand. Demand for rare earths is exploding. EVs are replacing gas cars. Every EV needs 10 times more rare earths than a gas car. Wind turbines are being built everywhere. Each turbine needs hundreds of kilograms. Electronics are proliferating. More phones, more computers, more devices. All require rare earths. By 2030, rare earth demand is projected to triple, and China controls the supply. Warning sign 4, weaponization. China has already threatened to cut off rare earth exports. In 2010, during a dispute with Japan, China restricted rare earth shipments. Japan's electronics industry panicked. In 2019, China threatened the US during trade tensions. They haven't pulled the trigger fully yet, but the threat is real. And as US-China tensions increase over Taiwan, trade, and geopolitics, the risk of weaponization grows. Warning sign 5, stockpiling. The US Department of Defense has a strategic stockpile of rare earths, but it's small. Enough for maybe a few months of weapons production. Not enough for a prolonged conflict or blockade. China, meanwhile, has been stockpiling. They're building reserves, securing supply, preparing for a future where rare earths are the leverage point in any conflict. Here's what this means for you, for the economy, for national security, for daily life. If China cuts off rare earth exports, the global economy stops. Not slows, stops. No new iPhones, no new EVs, no new wind turbines. Existing electronics manufacturing shuts down within months. Supply chains collapse. Companies like Apple, Tesla, and Samsung all depend on Chinese rare earths. Without supply, production halts, stock markets crash. For national security, the US military cannot function without rare earths. If China cuts us off, we cannot build new weapons. The F-35 program stops. Missile production stops. The technological edge the US military depends on, precision guidance, stealth, advanced sensors, requires rare earths, and we're dependent on China for them. It's a strategic catastrophe for daily life. Imagine your phone breaks. You can't replace it. Your car breaks down. You can't buy an EV. Your laptop dies. No new computers available. That's what a rare earth cutoff looks like. The modern world doesn't function without them. Now, here's the question everyone asks. Can't we just find alternatives? Can't we mine our own? Can't we break free? The answer is yes, but not soon. Mining is possible. The US, Australia, Canada, and others have rare earth deposits. Mountain Pass is operating again. New mines are being developed, but mining is only half the problem. Processing is the bottleneck, and building processing capacity takes a decade. China spent 30 years building their processing infrastructure. We're trying to do it in 10. Maybe we succeed. But in the meantime, we're vulnerable. Alternatives are limited. Researchers are looking for substitutes, magnets that don't require rare earths, screens that use different materials. But the technology isn't there yet. And even if breakthroughs happen, commercialization takes years. Recycling helps. Rare earths can be recovered from old electronics. But recycling infrastructure barely exists, and recycling alone can't meet demand. The US produces 1.5 million tons of electronic waste per year. We recycle less than 1% of the rare earths in it. The rest goes to landfills or gets shipped to China, where they recover the rare earths and sell them back to us. Here's the brutal truth. The US and the West made a strategic mistake. We let China gain monopoly control of a resource we knew was essential. We did it because it was cheaper in the short term. We outsourced production. We shut down domestic capacity. We became dependent. And now we're paying the price. China didn't just get lucky, they planned this. In the 1990s, Deng Xiaoping said, "The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths." He understood the strategic value, and China invested accordingly. They built the mines. They built the processing plants. They subsidized production until competitors went out of business. They secured monopoly control. And now they have leverage. The same leverage Britain had with coal, the same leverage America had with oil, the same leverage OPEC had with oil prices. Control of a strategic resource creates superpower status, and China has control. Let's compare the four monopolies. Britain's coal monopoly lasted about 100 years from 1800 to 1900. It ended when others industrialized and oil replaced coal. America's oil monopoly lasted about 30 years from 1945 to 1975. It ended when production peaked and OPEC formed. OPEC's leverage lasted about 15 years from 1973 to 1988. It weakened when non-OPEC production increased and demand fell. China's rare earth monopoly started around 2010. We're 15 years in. And unlike previous monopolies, this one is hardening. China is investing more, building more capacity, securing more supply chains. They're not coasting, they're entrenching, and the window to break free is closing. 4 times in modern history, control of a strategic resource determined global power. Coal created the British Empire. Oil created American hegemony. Oil leverage created OPEC wealth and Middle East importance. Rare earth control is creating Chinese leverage over the entire developed world. The pattern is identical: discovery, development, monopoly, dependency, leverage, and eventually collapse. But we're only at stage 5, the leverage stage, and this stage can last decades. In the meantime, China controls the resource that powers modern civilization. Every technology, every military system, every green energy solution, all dependent on Chinese supply. That's the rare earth trap, and we're in it. Some people say this is alarmist, that the market will solve it, that we'll find alternatives, that China wouldn't dare cut us off because they need our markets. That's the same thing Britain's rivals said about coal. The same thing America's rivals said about oil. The same thing OPEC's customers said before the embargo. Dependency is dependency, and when you depend on a rival for something essential, you're vulnerable. China knows it, the Pentagon knows it. The question is whether the public knows it, and whether we'll do something about it before it's too late. Because right now, China has us exactly where they want us, dependent, vulnerable, and with no short-term way out. That's the power of strategic resource monopoly, and that's the rare earth trap. If this changed how you see the future of technology, geopolitics, and power, subscribe. Because when China uses this leverage, when the rare earth crisis becomes undeniable, you'll want to understand what happened and why. The pattern has repeated 4 times. Coal, oil, oil again, now rare earths. And every time, control of the resource determined who ruled the world. History has the answers.